Hey, what's happening, everybody? It is Robert Phoenix broadcasting to you live from Studio B in Fredericksburg, Texas. Decided to get out of Studio A today, get under the bright lights, and have a. Let me just change my connection here real quick so we can get the most robust stream available to us. So you don't have to deal with a lot of buffering and pixelated imagery. So good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. It is just a little bit later than we normally broadcast. I got a bit of a late start on the day, but here I am, ready to share with you some of the things that I've been following and tracking with what is happening in the New Zealand operation, which at some point, of course, will go down the memory hole, as all things do. And I'm going to track some of these memory hole moments and a certain persona that is connected to and attached to the memory hole moment. Somebody you may not know of or have heard about, but clearly there is a link here. So welcome to the show. We're going to get right into it. Seems like all the various portals are open. We have 15minutesofflame.com. That's happening live. I've been chatting with the extremely intelligent Eileen K. And we got a few other folks over there as well in the general chat. So that's happening now. If you want to come on over to 15 Minutes of Flame, the good news about that, if you can get on the chat over there, it's pretty anonymous. You don't have to sign in through YouTube. You don't need an account. You can still be a part of the community. And I know there are other parts of the community here that like to be over on the other chat. And they're showing up right now. There's Ani and Christian. Good morning to you both. It is a beautiful day as we are on the precipice of the spring equinox, right? Yeah, spring equinox. So it's right there, very, very close. We're mere hours away from spring actually taking place here in the northern hemisphere, while in the southern hemisphere, where New Zealand is located, of course, they are going to experience the fall. And perhaps the fall is metaphoric in this case as to what happened in Christchurch on the 15th of February. And here in this country, it was at 1:40 p.m. In New Zealand time. And I went through and I looked at the chart of the events on Sunday night. If you haven't caught that, you can catch that over on the 11th House channel. 2 hours worth of astrology breakdown, all the stuff that's associated with that event, and some other stuff as well. So without much more delay, so let me just check in with the YouTube group, see how they're doing. There's Judy, and there's Michael and Beth and Rhonda. There we are. We're assembling. We have our own little version of Wu-Tang, right? This is not the Wu-Tang Clan. I'll come up with a name for you guys. I got to come up with a name. I'll throw that out to the chat room. If any of you guys have a name that you want to have for the chat room, bring it on. I'm open to it. I'm open. All right, so let's get into this New Zealand thing. Okay, so we are now a few days out, and of course the outrage is continuing to simmer and boil over. The after effects are already starting to kick in. And as I mentioned before, this is a global event. And the effect of this is when I really first started to, there was an event that kicked in where I began to see that events that happened in other countries were now being transposed and being used to have some kind of international and global impact. And the first event that I really saw that with was the death of, what was her name? Regina Steenkamp. I think that was her first name. And it was at the hands of Oscar Pistorius, who was the Olympic athlete who ran with blades, and he killed his model girlfriend. And I got into that intensely, the Steenkamp family, their roots, where they came from, the wealth, the whole 9 yards. And that was an event, I believe it took place around 2013. And that's when I began to see that there was this broadcast effect, or this echo effect from that event that was being picked up on in this country as if it originated in the United States. And this is, of course, a world that is theoretically, from the media standpoint, without borders. So what's happening in New Zealand is an extension of that. And we're going to see more of that when they deem that it is important to link these events to a kind of greater locus of, I wouldn't call it consciousness, influence. So I'll give you an example. There was a shooting yesterday on a Dutch train. And I think that shooting probably was not planned, okay? Sometimes these things happen, they're not planned, and they're not really picked up on and tracked by the media. So what happened in Holland yesterday was clearly somebody who had their own agenda. We're going after one person, and it came, it blipped, it's gone, right? Prior to what happened in New Zealand, in Nigeria, there were a number of Christians, I think the total is now up to 150, that were slaughtered. Does the media pick up on this? The answer is no. They're not going to pick up on it because it doesn't promote a narrative and it doesn't serve an agenda. They don't want to portray Christians as being victims. They don't want to portray Christians as being this underclass that is being threatened and bullied and stuck in and dropped into this victim status, martyrdom. They don't want to do that. They don't want to do that at all. In fact, they want to flip it, and they want to create a picture of white Christian nationalists as being cold-blooded and being the source of a lot of the world's violence, troubles, ills, etc. And that is the narrative that's going on, that's happening. And we can transpose this to New Zealand, where, of course, we have this character, Brenton Tarrant. I read the Veterans Today breakdown of the Tarrant situation. Last night, I spent probably about 45 minutes listening to Yoichi Shimatsu and his breakdown of the situation, which I was already leaning into before I listened to it. So one of the things that really jumped out for me when I heard about this, and that it was an event that, of course, was dealing with Islam and this so-called atheist, whatever he is, I'll try to break that down a little bit, my feeling was that John Brennan was involved. John Brennan, the deposed head of the CIA and supposedly a converted Muslim. Clearly he hates Donald Trump. Clearly he hates nationalism. He might even abhor Christianity. And my sense was that John Brennan had his hands in this thing. And of course, Yoichi gets into it, and he has some pieces that he puts together. The other John, we're dealing with two Johns, of course, because we're dealing with the Gemini situation. Gemini was rising at the time in the Western Placidus chart of the event. The other John is John Podesta. And John Podesta was in New Zealand. He was there to talk to their rising star, their PM, Jacinda Ardern, who I found some very interesting footage on from Live Leak. Let's just say Jacinda Ardern has more in common with Michelle Obama than she does with Melania Trump. Okay? You know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah, surprise package. Jacinda's got a surprise package for people. Anyway, so he was there promoting her as this next great superstar, and there's a video interview with him, and he's got the nervous hands and everything, and Podesta's a weirdo, and I thought, that he had been out of circulation for a while, and that, that the Q squad had removed him. Clearly, that's not the case, and he was there in New Zealand just before, 3 days prior to what happened. So we have the fingerprints of the two Johns involved, Brennan and Podesta. That's my opinion. Okay. If you look at the gun, and I think tomorrow what I'll do is I'll bring in some visuals tomorrow. And if you look at the gun's got all kinds of writing and all kinds of symbols, and it's like we could spend probably the whole show breaking it down. But one of the things on the gun, and if you're really paying attention, is there's a symbol for the fish, which is Pisces, okay? And that's on the gun. It looks like the rune Othelia or Othalia, and that rune is about separation, property. It's Piscean, so we're creating this tableau of the victim, of the martyr, of this avenger of the Piscean age. That's on his gun. And then the number 14 is also on the gun. Remember the hands with Podesta? He has the fish in 14, right? So there's clearly, they're leaving clues, okay? They're leaving clues about theoretically who this guy is, if you're really looking for them. They're like dangling and trolling. They're trolling us. The other thing that's really weird about this event, now it didn't happen recently, it did happen over the summer, but the Parkland kids had gone to New Zealand, which I found to be really bizarre, right? Where do the Parkland kids get money from, by the way? And they're totally weaponized. You know that, right? The Parkland kids are weaponized. They are a revolutionary group who have been weaponized by their handlers. I'll read this to you. This is from July. This is a summer event. Survivors of Florida school shooting plant trees in New Zealand in commemoration. Discuss with Christchurch volunteer group how to keep youth movements going. How to keep youth movements going for what? Going for what? It's like they're taking over these kids' brains and they're turning them into little commies. And that's what the youth movement is doing. So I'm going to read this to you. Delaney Tarr. Remember Delaney Tarr? We're going to get that bum stock and we're not going to stop. That's Delaney Tarr. Delaney Tarr says Valentine's Day was supposed to be a time to celebrate beauty and love. But instead it turned into a day of fear when a gunman attacked her Florida. You know, some of these events are always around specific days. Like in Florida, Parkland, Valentine's Day, Ides of March. It happens all the time. But now she's finding inspiration among others who overcame heartbreak half a world away. The 18-year-old senior is one of 28 students from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland. Who pays for this? Who pays for this and who selects which students go? What if you wanted to go to New Zealand? They're like, oh, sorry, you can't go. Well, why not? Well, you're not part of the group. Not part of the in-group. The goal of the trip is for the students to learn how to keep a youth movement going long after tragedy has faded from the headlines. Wow. Yeah, let's capitalize on that tragedy and keep that youth movement going. The model is New Zealand's Student Volunteer Army, which began helping citizens in Christchurch after earthquakes devastated the city, including the 2011 quake that killed 185 people. More than 7 years later, the group is continuing its civic-minded work. So they came out of the earthquake tragedy, and now it's like, let's turn you into great little proto-social communists with your comrades from Parkland. We will never be able to really experience Valentine's Day, to experience school, to experience life in the same way that we used to, she said. And while that is heartbreaking, we've tried to make the most out of it. All right, let's just break that down. Valentine's Day is a fucking fake holiday, okay? It's fake. It's a fake holiday. It's a Hallmark holiday. It's, Caesar, what's his name? The kid from, I'm already blanking on his name. He probably did you a favor. Or they did you a favor. Whoever had their fingers innately engaged, deeply engaged in the part to take Valentine's Day away. Right? I mean, it's a fake holiday. To experience school, you're out of school. You're done. You're moving on to college or your new revolutionary Neiman Marxist lifestyle. To experience life in the same way we used to. Well, you're doing pretty well. You get to travel all over the world. You can speak to people. I would say that the Parkland event was an upgrade for you, Delaney Tarr. And while that is heartbreaking, we've tried to make the most out of it. We've tried so hard to make some positive change out of something that never should have affected us, never should have affected anyone. And ultimately, that's why we are here now. Not as much to mourn the past, but as to look forward to the future. Who scripts these kids? Tarr and many of the other Parkland students have become known around the world for their passionate advocacy of gun control. Tarr said they have faced their share of backlash, and they try to stress they're not against the Second Amendment. Of course they are. Of course they are. But instead, believe there are reasonable limitations to be placed upon it. Right. The debate can seem foreign to many people in New Zealand, where gun violence is rare. Hello. Until when? Last week. And perhaps because of that, gun control hasn't been a major focus of discussion during the trip. Rather, the discussions have been about leadership, developing social influence, and affecting grassroots change. And for many of the Florida students, about experiencing a place they might have only heard about in geography class or seen in a movie. The students are paying for a portion of their trip. How much? While other contributions come from fundraising and grants. It was said to us yesterday, you could either fall apart when tragedy happens, or you can band together and become stronger, said Danielle Driscoll, a teacher at Marjorie Stone Douglas High School, who's accompanying students. She said both the New Zealand and Parkland students have gotten stronger. Nicholas Cruz, that's our guy, faces 17 counts of first-degree murder, 17 counts of attempted murder in the shooting. Where is his trial? What is going on with Nicholas Cruz? Oh, I forgot. He pled guilty. No trial. Let's move along now. Nothing to see here. So we have the Parkland kids about 6 months ahead to 7 months ahead. What are we, July 24th? So that's going to be right at the tip of Leo, right? So we're about 7 months ahead of the whole deal. And laying the groundwork for what was to come. There she is, Delaney Tarr, planting a piece of paper in a post hole commemorating Helena Ramsey. So there's a lot more here to what's happening in the New Zealand Christchurch event. Of course, I just talked about the Yuichi Shimatsu interview, and I highly recommend it. You'd have to go over to, I think you might be able to find it until sometime later today. It's over on Jeff Rentz's site, and there's a listen live link. And what happens is that Jeff only catalogs the interviews for the subscribers, so he can backlog them and keep them alive for subscribers. But there's a listen live button, and that will change later tonight. What happens is the program rotates, so you just plug in, and at some point it'll come back to you, the Yuichi interview, which I highly recommend. He's pretty well versed in this stuff. He was a childhood actor in Japan, and he's very well versed on special effects and all kinds of other stuff. It's his assessment that nobody died. Now, of course, Gordon Duff's assessment is people died. Gordon Duff has the background of the guy as the shooter and the connections between Syria and Turkey and Israel and North Korea, and clearly that's all part of his travel itinerary from his past and recent past. We know he's gone to these places. Duff went down a couple of different levels and put some other stuff together. Now, whether nobody died or somebody died, that's up for you to decide and to make your decision around this. What I do know is that they're making this increasingly difficult to talk about. And this is part of a two-pronged effort to clamp down on free speech, number one, and number two, clamp down on the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms, right? There we go. So this is a global event. I talked about this before. I think it was Rena Steenkamp. That's what her name was. That was Oscar Pistorius' girlfriend. And that's when I realized that we were now in a global network of influence with this stuff. So you have to make up your own mind. You have to come to your own decisions. It's very difficult, though, because there's a lot of information out there, sorting through, sifting through. There's a lot of redaction. Things are being dropped down the memory hole, onto the next thing, onto the next thing. We're going to have more of these events. It's going to happen. This is going to happen. This is going to continue to happen until the desired effect comes about. What is the desired effect? The desired effect will be the eradication of arms from individuals, not just the United States, but across the globe. They don't want guns in anybody's hands across the planet. They want to disarm populace across the planet. And at that point, there will probably either be a global police force, or there will be theoretical national police forces linked up, right? Linked up in a kind of global band or a global network. But that's the ultimate goal. If they don't get that, then they'll go after some sort of bloodshed, some sort of revolution, some sort of open-armed conflict in which a lot of people's lives are lost, and this would be another version of some kind of, end game. This stuff is going to continue to happen until they come to this point, unless, of course, somebody drops in and starts removing some of these people from the scene, like, hello, John Podesta. These guys are walking around. They're being able to stage these events. Now, remember, this event did happen on a Mercury retrograde. It may backfire on them. Why is it that the video from the event is being banned from the internet? And why is it that this young guy in New Zealand is staring down 10 years for sharing the video? Is there something in the video that they don't want you to see? Is that part of it? Is it a red herring? Maybe they want you to think that there's something in the video that they don't want you to see. But the bottom line is they don't want you to see the video. They don't want you talking about it. And these kinds of discussions moving forward are going to become harder and harder to come by, unless, of course, the disassembling of their networks and their system begins to take place, which may, in fact, actually be happening. And we may not be completely aware of this. But we're in a war right now, and I've been talking about this for a while, and I'm not paranoid. And it's a war for your consciousness. It's a war for your ideas, a war for your hearts and minds. It's taking place every single day, and you're on the front lines with it. And meanwhile, we've got life going on out there. It's a beautiful day. Looking at spring, we have people in our lives, relationships in our lives, things that we find important. We have projects, ideas, passions, hobbies. We think about the next generation behind us. We want to nurture them. We want them to have a fruitful existence on this third-dimensional plane for whatever reason they're here, whatever lessons they have to go through. So these are all important things that are still a part of our trajectory. Some of you have children, some of you have grandchildren, right? This is what happens. In the meantime, we're having to deal with this other thing that's going on. And it's very hard to wrap your head around that. It's very hard to wrap your head around the fact that there is a war going on. And again, even if it's a war for your psyche or your spirit or your mind or your heart, there is a war going on. And it's being waged every single day. That may sound extreme, but it's clear. When you step back and you look at it, it's very, very clear. I mean, even if you want to break it down to a mundane level, there's a war going on for your pocketbook. I mean, it's a really mundane thing. How many insurance companies are out there, right? There's at least, dozens and dozens of insurance companies. There's about 5 that are always fighting for your attention on TV, whether it's Liberty or Geico or the General, whatever. And they're on the front lines, right? There's a war. They're waging a war for your dollars, to put your dollars, your money into their insurance company. So they go back and forth. Look at what's going on with Budweiser. Budweiser, Bud Light is waging a war against Coors and Miller Lite. And they're saying, look, you put corn syrup in your beer. Corn syrup is bad. We don't put corn syrup in our beer. They're waging a war against Bud Light and Coors Light and Miller Lite. And that war is going on in your head. Oh, God, let's see, corn syrup. Okay, I'll drink Bud Light. It's going on all the time. All the time. So we live in a dimension of conflict. And this part is true. And the key to understanding this is that you have to know that you're in a dimension of conflict without being in conflict yourself. You can't be conflicted inside of yourself, even if the world around you is in conflict. Or perhaps even if the conflict is directly or indirectly part of your experience. You cannot be in conflict. This is important. You have to be able to create your world in a way that is harmonic and congruent. Now, does it mean that you have to wall yourself off and not deal with people and diverse influences? No, because that's not how life works. There's a great story that Krishnamurti talks about. And Krishnamurti was talking about a woman who decided that she wanted to have ultimate peace. And she figured out that if she just stayed at home and had her four walls, nobody would bother her, and she would have ultimate peace. Well, according to Krishnamurti, every single day there would be people coming to her door to sell things. That doesn't happen so much anymore. We don't get a lot of door-to-door salespeople. We get interstitial ads and bombarded with whatever's happening on the internet. The internet is the new Fuller Brush salesman. Anyway, but he brought this up because she could not hide and she could not stick herself in, behind those four walls. That ultimately the world was going to find her. And yes, that's true. It does ultimately find us. And we have to be able to learn how to deal with that on some level. On the other hand, if you can create your existence in a way that is more harmonic and more peaceful, then more power to you. Okay? More power to you. Why not? You're the pilot of your ship. You get to captain your experience. And if it's important for you to be involved in conflict and debate and deal with diverse personalities, and every single day, stretch yourself and go to the mat, then that's fine. That's your experience. It is not the only experience. There are many different types of experience to be had on this so-called planet, right? So that's a little bit of a divergence, but I just wanted to bring that up. Because we are in conflict, but you yourself should do everything in your power to unify your consciousness so that you're not in conflict. That means you need to know where you stand on certain things. Can you revise where you stand? Absolutely. Sometimes we have to. That's mutability. That's part of astrology. But to be unified in your own consciousness is very important. This is where the Christians get it. Oh yes, those Christians who are being vilified and crucified before our very eyes. They understand unity consciousness. Right? They understand it. They get it. There are parameters within the belief system and the structure which allows them to operate without much drag or cognitive dissonance. They may have to deal with situations in their life, but they've got a technique to work with it. They pray. They surrender. There's a whole series of exercises that are built into that allows people to deal with conflict and stress. And sometimes they can use it as a shield or as an excuse. That can happen with any belief system. And all the belief systems have their version or their variety. Some are more complex than others. Christianity is probably the most simple, to be honest with you. I mean, a lot of people are very into Christians are very into the Bible, and they find a lot of strength in the Bible, in passages and teachings. But really, at the end of the day, it's about you and your consciousness linked up to the Most High, and that's how it works. That's how it works. I mean, that was the original message, right? So, anyway, if your consciousness is unified, then you're not in conflict, even though the world around you may be in conflict, and it's easier to move and navigate through that experience. Okay? So Shimatsu gets into this stuff, and he talks about how and he really looks at this from a theatrical production, that this is a production. Now, it's coming out that the New Zealand police force was having what? A training exercise. A training exercise to deal with a Christchurch-style event. Hello? Where were they? Probably in another part of town. Couldn't get over there in time. This is not a country, and Christchurch is not a city that is attuned to this kind of event. Well, they are now. They had their proverbial cherry popped. Christchurch. Interesting. I just keep coming back to that. Anyway. So they were having an event. They were having their own security event. John Podesta was there a few days beforehand. We had the Parkland kids there last summer. Laying the seeds, planting the seeds. That's what they're doing. They're planting. Not just planting trees, they're planting seeds. Now, how many of those kids from the, what's that group? The Student Volunteer Army. How many of them now are thinking back to their time with the Parkland 28? I'm sure they're thinking quite a bit about it. And now they're being activated. They're like a little sleeper cell now. No, I'm just kidding. Sort of. So what else did Shimatsu say? He says it's a Hollywood event. And he has a really bold assertion, which bears some thought and scrutiny. He says that some of those bodies that we see that were brought in were already dead. Right? He says that they were flown in from Malaysia, and the bodies had been kept on ice, and that they were already dead. So when you see this shooter plunking some of these people in a mix of what would be either real or blank cartridges, because it's pretty clear he's firing blanks with the shotgun. That ridiculous moment at the end of his bloody crusade. Oh yes, the Crusades. And he fires that shotgun into the front windshield. Nothing happens. Fires it 3 times. And by the way, anybody who knows anything about firing a shotgun at that close range, there's a really good chance that that buckshot would come back and hit you in the frickin' face. And then he finally gets to the other window and he hits it with, and Shimatsu thinks it's a blank cartridge, but close enough so that it actually shatters that window, because that window has a different density than the front window. And anyway, it's worth tracking down. He believes that those bodies were already dead. I'm just passing along what I was shared during his interview. And it's a very interesting interview. Very, very interesting. He gets into John Brennan. And my intuition had said John Brennan. Because these guys hate Trump. Trump basically, destroyed their operation, or is working on destroying their operation in the Middle East. And it's true. He may wind up privatizing it out to Eric Prince, Betsy DeVos's son-in-law, but their operation, what they're doing and have been doing, is being dismantled. And that's taking place. Apparently, this is what I've heard, that just recently they were bombing the opium fields in Afghanistan. So there's a sea change taking place. That's why they're moving their base of operations to Venezuela, partially. Anyway, so the Shimatsu thing is interesting, especially about the bodies being brought in that were already dead. Now, where do we see this? What movie do we see this in? It's in a film by Clint Eastwood, a Gemini, called Fistful of Dollars. If you watch Fistful of Dollars, should be essential viewing for people. It should be essential viewing. If you have not seen A Fistful of Dollars, you've got to see it. Number one, it's because that's where Clint Eastwood really breaks onto the scene, as this anti-hero in Sergio Leone's spaghetti westerns. That's his first film. There's the trilogy: A Fistful of Dollars, For a Few Dollars More, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And this really casts Eastwood's direction as an actor, later director. Now, in A Fistful of Dollars, he plays a stranger that comes into a town in Mexico where there are 2 families. There's a family from the United States, the Baxters, and then there's another family from Mexico. And what Clint Eastwood does is he goes back and forth. He's a Gemini, of course. He goes back and forth between these 2 families. And at one point in time, he's working for this family. At another point in time, he's working for this family. And really what he's doing is he's helping both families destroy one another. Okay? This is what Clint Eastwood's character does in the film. And it is a must-see if you want to understand the mindset. There is some morality involved on his end. He winds up liberating a woman and her husband and her son, who had been trapped, especially a woman, by the Mexican family, and separated from her son and her husband, who were treated brutally and cruelly. So he does have a bit of a conscience. There's the redemptive factor. There's always some redemptive factor with the anti-hero, right? And he also gets the shit beat out of him. So he has a price to pay for his, how shall I say this? less than attached morality. Okay, but at the end of the day, because he's able to play both sides against the middle and ultimately destroy their pernicious influence, he becomes the anti-hero who is the hero. But it's a really interesting film to watch because it's a model there, and the model is basically there's no conscience involved, right? He's amoral, he is asocial, borderline sociopathic, but at the same time having kind of a hidden or nascent morality. Now, is that what is driving the people who are doing these events? I don't know. I'm not in their body. They've got to be motivated by some kind of theoretical higher purpose. I guess in Brennan's case, it would be the promotion of Islam, because there is very good word that he converted to Islam while Barack Obama was running the country, and Brennan was the head of the CIA. But in that movie, A Fistful of Dollars, Clint Eastwood uses 2 dead bodies. He uses 2 dead bodies to smoke out the 2 families, and they're plunking them full of lead, because they think that these 2 bodies, these 2 guys who are already dead, actually have survived a hijack and a robbery that the Mexican family has carried out. And so the Mexican family is afraid that these 2 guys will sing, and they'll talk to the army, the government, and their operation will be at risk. So Clint Eastwood positions these bodies inside this cemetery. He actually digs them up, or puts them in there freshly. I think they were just killed. So he just brought them over on his horse. So he props them up, and then he tells the Baxters that that this Mexican family are going to go and get these guys who are alive. So now the Baxters want to go over there and catch them in the act. Right. So now these 2 forces converge, and these 2 guys who are dead become like this locus of this event. Both sides are plinking them full of lead. So clearly, it is a cinematic prop and part of a narrative. So is it out of the question that this could be the case? Right? We're dealing with things here. We are dealing with things that are staged. They're staged and they're programmed. Whether they're staged and programmed to the extent that I'm talking about, or staged and programmed to the extent that the event happens and this guy's just a psychopath. He's caught in this kind of psychological bear trap, right? It's sort of like the analogy would be, net fishing out in the ocean, where you create all these crazy conditions, and what will happen? Well, you'll start scooping up a bunch of fish, and somewhere in there you might get a bluegill tuna, right, or something like that, bluefin tuna. It's sort of fishing with net versus fishing with pole. You're gonna get stuff. You're gonna cast a wide net. You're gonna pick up sort of the detritus, or the bodies that are floating around. Is that what happens with the social conditions? Is this what happened to him? I mean, just throwing it out there, right? In any event, we're talking about an event that had some pre-staging involved. Whether it's the pre-staging of somebody's consciousness, or the actual pre-staging of the event itself, or the pre-staging of it together. That's what's going on, right? So the Shimatsu interview is very, very interesting, and brings up a lot of potential red flags with the whole thing, and gets us to reconsider what actually happened in New Zealand. And I guarantee you, there will be more. There will be more, because this is part of the world that we're living in. And why? Well, there's a guy by the name of Albert Pike, and some of you are quite familiar with Albert Pike. He was a 33rd degree Mason, and spoke about 13 different languages, was known as a highly ranking satanic priest, also was a general in the Confederate Army, and whose statue to this day
still stands in Washington, D.C., while other members of the Confederate Army's statues have been taken down. Not Albert Pike. So there's a theoretical letter that Pike wrote to Giuseppe Mazzini in 1871. So the word on the street is that this letter was on display at the British Museum Library in London until 1977. So we're going down the memory hole here. The letter has been claimed by many internet sites to reside in the British Library in London, which denies the letter exists. Mazzini was an Italian revolutionary leader in the mid-1800s, as well as the director of the Illuminati. Albert Pike, 33rd degree Mason, occultist Grand Master, created the Southern jurisdiction of the Masonic Scottish Rite Order. It is believed to be that he was also the founder of the Ku Klux Klan. So these are extracts from the letter showing how 3 world wars have been planned for many generations. Okay, so this was, and they were on the precipice of the First World War. It was not that far away. The First World War must be brought about in order to permit the Illuminati to overthrow the power of the czars in Russia. Okay? Well, I have a new troll. This guy Brian. He's YouTube. I got a new troll. Welcome, Brian, to the show. Just keep listening. You may actually wind up learning a few things. Let's see. It says, okay, the power of the czar, which I've been talking about, making the country a fortress of atheistic communism, which happened. The divergences caused by the agentur, agents of the Illuminati, in quotes, between the British and Germanic empires will be used to foment this war. At the end of the war, communism will be built and used in order to destroy other governments in order to weaken the religions. Did this happen? I think we can agree that probably happened. The Second World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences between the fascists and the political Zionists. This war must be brought about so that Nazism is destroyed and that the political Zionism be strong enough to institute a sovereign state of Israel and Palestine. During the Second World War, international communism must become strong enough in order to balance Christendom, which would then be restrained and held in check until the time when we would need it for the final social cataclysm. And then, of course, the letter ends, the theoretical letter ends, and the Third World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences caused by the agentur of the Illuminati between the political Zionists and the leaders of the Islamic world. The war must be conducted in such a way that Islam, the Muslim Arabic world, and political Zionism, the state of Israel, mutually destroy each other. Meanwhile, the other nations, once more divided on this issue, will be constrained to fight to the point of complete physical, moral, spiritual, and economical exhaustion. We shall unleash the nihilists. What was this guy that we just saw, Brenton Tarrant? Certainly has the appearance of being a nihilist, doesn't he? We shall unleash the nihilists and the atheists, and we shall provoke a formidable social cataclysm, which in all its horror will show clearly to the nations the effect of absolute atheism, origin of savagery, and of the most bloody turmoil. Then everywhere the citizens obliged to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries will exterminate those destroyers of civilization, and the multitude disillusioned with Christianity, whose deistic spirits will from that moment be without compass or direction, anxious for an ideal, but without knowing where to render its adoration, will receive the true light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer, brought finally out in the public view. This manifestation will result from the general reactionary movement, which will follow the destruction of Christianity and atheism, both conquered and exterminated at the same time. All right. So this letter theoretically existed in London at the British Museum Library until 1977. It's been often talked about. And in the light of what happened in New Zealand, this last paragraph here is quite interesting. We shall unleash the nihilists and the atheists, and we shall provoke a formidable social cataclysm, which in all its horror will show clearly to the nations the effect of absolute atheism, origin of savagery, and of the most bloody turmoil. Might qualify for what happened in New Zealand. So this is the blueprint, and we're just bringing it, the theoretical blueprint, just bringing it out to the light. And are there going to be more? Well, based on this letter, technically speaking, that might actually be the case. So what are we going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? Well, you've got to stay within a unified field of consciousness inside of who you are, so that you are not buffeted by this outer world. And that takes work. It takes a lot of work. But it's worth it. Speaking of work, I want to just talk about somebody who has a very interesting job. Because I began to think about, well, what happens to these people that perform these heinous crimes, these heinous acts? Where do they go? What do they do? Are they tried in public? Ever? What happened to Robert Lee Bowers? What happened to Caesar Sayoc? You know who they are, right? Caesar Sayoc was the guy who theoretically sent those fake bombs to all the people that on the so-called left would be in the crosshairs of the so-called right, including somebody like John Brennan, correct? So what's going on with him? Is he being tried? What's happening with Robert Lee Bowers, the guy who was, again, theoretically involved in the synagogue shooting? Well, I found out something interesting. I found out something very, very interesting. Robert Gregory Bowers, my bad. Robert Gregory Bowers. There is one attorney who represents pretty much all these characters. One! And across all these state lines. Her name is Judy Clark, and she lives, she was born in Asheville, North Carolina. Graduated T.C. Roberson High School, went to Furman and University of South Carolina Law School. And she's the president of the National Association. She served as president of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. Okay, Judy Clark. Let me read you her client list. Remember Susan Smith, the woman who killed her kids, right? Well, she was her lawyer. What about Ted Kaczynski? Unabomber? She's his lawyer. Buford Furrow? He was the Aryan Nation member accused of the Los Angeles Jewish Community Center shooting, right? His lawyer. Zacharias Moussaoui. How about him? Remember him? Yep, his lawyer. Oh, let's see, who else? Eric Rudolph, the guy who theoretically bombed the Olympic Park, the Centennial Olympic Park bombing, was involved in a number of bombings at abortion clinics, Planned Parenthood. Yep, she represented him. How about Jared Lee Loughner, the guy who theoretically shot Gabby Giffords and the judge, right? Oh, yep, his lawyer. Oh, what about Dzhokhar Tsarnaev? Yep, his lawyer too. Remember him? And then there's Robert Gregory Bowers, the guy who theoretically went in and shot at the synagogue. Interesting client list, Miss Clark. Is it because she has such a sense of justice? She has to come to the defense of all these criminals, these cold-blooded psychopaths? Or maybe she's just been assigned to work with them and then move them along and contain their evidence, contain their confessions, contain any other information that may be contrary or dissimilar to the actual narrative. I just found out about this woman. Anyway, is she going to fly to New Zealand now and represent Brent Tarrant? Question mark. Judy Clark. Keep your eyes on the Bowers stuff. So it says that he has been arraigned, and that happened in February. She manages to keep these guys off of death row. Interesting, right? Interesting. Judy Clark. All right, let me check in with you guys in the chat room. Been down a bit of a rabbit hole today. See what's happening, see where the buzz is. The crisis actor specialist. Solid niche, never hurts to specialize. That's funny, Michael. What else we got going on here? We got, let's see, something happened to our friend Trey. Nebraska, news not showing extent, massive worst flooding ever here. Iowa, Missouri. So much, yeah, you guys have had huge floods in Nebraska. This polar vortex. My state is underwater. I know what that's like. We had it a couple of years ago in Texas. I mean, every single day it was just brutal. Brutal, brutal, brutal. Kathleen's in the live show. There's Ian. Kim has officially returned sovereignty to America, but Trump has so far refused to announce it to the public. I'm not sure where that's coming from. What else we have here? Restructuring. Kim restructuring the entire banking system. Let's see what else we have here. Ian is the man, a trust, a true. All right, so we got a nice little conversation going on in the chat room. And I wish I could be a part of it, but that's one of the good things that you can, if you're part of the chat room, whether it's over on YouTube or whether it's on the 15 Minutes of Flame, there's some interesting ideas and connections. Over on the other side, what do we have here? Eileen K says, I wonder how well guns will work against Robocops. Yeah, exactly. Maury says the stuff is scripted for the masses, the marketplace, surface dwellers who are still the numerical majority of shallow depth, no doubt. Solara, Planet Dead Bodies, that was one of my initial impressions. They sure went twitching, you know, and you can't go back and really watch the video, although there is some of that going around. I've not watched video I've heard that have massive amounts of money. Anyway, some good conversations going on both sides here, over on the 15-minute side and over on the YouTube side. Got about 6 minutes left in the show, just to let you know. Is it me or is AK's vibe a little weird? What is AK's vibe? Who AK? What is AK? Arkansas? Is that Arkansas? Is that AK? With the AK we're talking about here. Hang in there, Trey Bean. Hang in there. We're all going through some interesting times. And you know what? Your life goes on. You've got jobs, you've got goals, you've got dreams, you've got aspirations. These are all very important. And as a result of that, you know, sometimes you may need a little bit of guidance, you may need a little bit of clarity, and that's where me, Robert Phoenix, the astrologer, kicks in. And I just wanted to let people know that that's also what I do. It's what I do for a living. I do astrological readings. So if you are interested in getting a reading, you can find me over on robertphoenix.com. And the good thing about astrology is that it's not just about, you know, what you're doing for work, what you're doing for a relationship. It also encompasses a lot of other things. Your physical health, your well-being, your psychological health, and even your spiritual trajectory, which I often talk about inside the parameters of a chart reading. So even as the world is changing, you're still a spiritual being going through a human experience. And to that extent, astrology is still very, very important as it links us up to other aspects and areas of our consciousness, and not just what we do every day here in this world, which is a reflection of that, but also subtle realms and other dimensions of who we are. So you can find me over at robertphoenix.com if you're interested in reading. I've got my Mars webinar, which we did that last Saturday, and that's available. You can download that and get into the manifestation of Mars and about 3 hours worth of really in-depth information. Oh, one other really weird thing I wanted to bring up. Something really weird happened that a lot of people haven't linked with this event down in New Zealand. The final song that you hear in this guy's car is Arthur Brown, right? I'm the God of Hellfire, right? And I bring you fire. I remember the first time I heard that song, it scared the shit out of me, to be honest with you. And there was another part I was like, this is kind of cool, right? You know, it's kind of dark. It was like, you know, there were both sides of that. It was like, you know, it was like, oh, it was like, wow, that's kind of interesting, right? So that song was playing, which was basically the soundtrack to, you know, turning the world into flames. What's really interesting is that Arthur Brown played in Austin, Texas, the night of that shooting, okay, so which would have been the next day in New Zealand. He was playing, And he ended his set with Fire, his famous semi-hit. Okay, so he ends his set with that. Then this event happens, and then they play the song, and then the song is played. Wow, how about that? And it was so sketchy and weird that Arthur Brown had to cancel his gigs that he was going to continue to have in Austin. He's a guy that lives in Austin from time to time. I guess he's in his 70s now, late 60s or early 70s. And he still gigs. And he did a gig that night. And he ended with that song. And just mere hours away, that's the last track of music or piece of music you hear, during that production. Interesting note to end on. And Austin too, right? Because we've been talking about Austin. Austin had been a large point of our. If I had known that, man, when I was talking with Emily and with Freeman, that would have been just a freaking bombshell to drop during the Friday show. But it's all just coming out now, right? So I'm giving you the 411 around that. Strange timing, bad synchronicity, maybe, or is it telling? Is there a clue in there that might be deeply metaphysical that pay attention to? All right, I am out of here. Oh, Anthony Kiedis. Oh yeah, Anthony Kiedis. Red Hot Chili Peppers. Thanks for the AK. This is Robert Phoenix. You can find me at robertphoenix.com, over on Facebook, and other various places. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to say what's possible. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll be back tomorrow at right around 9 a.m. Central Standard Time. Until then, have a great day.